Jane Ray is an award-winning illustrator and author, best known for her distinctive children's book illustrations. She's illustrated over 70 children's books, and as well as writing and illustrating her own stories, has worked with many other authors, including Michael Rosen, Vikram Seth, Carol-Ann Duffy and Jeanette Winterson. Jane has been shortlisted for the prestigious Kate Greenway Award 8 times. She was the winner of the Smarties Award in 1992 and is the 2018 IBI UK Illustrator nominee for the Hans Christian Andersen Award. She's also produced work for, amongst many others, the London Film Festival, the Royal Opera House, Amnesty International and UNICEF. Nikki Gamble met with Jane to talk about her illustration of The Glassmaker's Daughter, written by Diane Hofmeyr, which has been chosen as one of the Year 2 Reading Gladiators book selection for our 2018-19 programme.
Jane, I just wanted to start really because I have known your work for a long time, and I think, although I might be incorrect, but I think I first discovered it through some wrapping paper that I was using. Did that come before children's books?
It was one of the first things I got into from my degree show when I graduated many moons ago. And I was commissioned to design some greetings cards and wrapping paper, and that's been a very useful second income stream all my working life, pretty much, with the Roger Laborde, this card company. But it was around the same time that I started doing books as well. I mean, I took my portfolio around to lots and lots of publishers and got lots and lots of refusals. And then suddenly it clicked and I was commissioned, and I've been in work ever since. I've been very, very lucky. Mm-hmm. But certainly the cards and the wrapping paper were a very useful sort of backdrop to everything else. Yeah.
We're particularly today going to be talking about this wonderful book, The Glassmaker's Daughter. When you're given a new project like this, how does it still remain exciting for you after all the number of books that you've illustrated?
Well, I have to say that is the most exciting moment of any project, is just when you first get the story, you get the text and you sort of sit and read it, and I just let images flood into my head, and everything is still possible. You know, you haven't committed anything to paper yet, and it's all still as perfect as it could be in your own imagination. You know, so that's a lovely moment, and that's where I begin. And I mean, with this story, it was the second book I'd done with Diane Hofmeyr, and when we were working on the first one, which was Zarafa Giraffa, she had told me about The Glassmaker's Daughter, and that she really wanted me to do it. So I'd been looking forward to it for a long time.
One of the things that strikes me in this and in your other books as well as something of the kind of influences there, and I don't know whether... I mean, I'd like to explore what your art influences are. To me, I look at it and I see some of the art of the early Renaissance in there, particularly with the patterning on fabrics and things like that. But again, I could be completely wrong. So I'm interested to know where those sorts of artistic inspiration come from.
No, you're absolutely right. I love Italian art. I love the art of the Renaissance. I've always enjoyed those triptychs and the sort of shape of stained glass windows and arches and the shapes that you see in architecture, door frames, and that's often been a sort of framing device that I've used in my work, and that the patterns of painted tiles and carved terracotta and the fabrics, you know, I just love it all.
It's funny that you mentioned the architectural framing devices, because that's very evident in the book here, and was one of the things that I specifically was going to pick up, but you've mentioned it yourself. I think there's for example, here, just for people listening, we're looking at a page that has the mask makers of Venice on there, and it's framed by this wonderful archway.
I mean, that's a gift for a picture book artist and designer, you know, because it naturally frames the page and gives a space for the text and a space for the illustration. So it's a useful framework. It's a very it's a lovely place to start in a picture.
So you've talked about Italy, and of course this book, not all of your books are set in Italy. This one seems to be a particular gift then, seeing as it is Venice. And I wondered whether there was any particular research that you had to do. This to me looked like it could be the island of San Giorgio in Venice, but what kind of research, I suppose, did you do?
Well, I've been to Venice 2 or 3 times, and like everybody else, fallen in love with it completely. So I just went with a sketchbook and drew and took lots and lots of photographs. And I'm always drawn to the details of a place. When you go to somewhere like Venice, you can be completely overwhelmed by just how much there is. Where do you start drawing? Where do you start taking pictures? So one of the first things I noticed when I was walking along the canals was the sort of weed in the canals, the fronds of weed sort of flowing with the water in the canal. And I'd worked on another book set in Venice called Heart Song with Kevin Crossley Holland a couple of years back, and I used that image in that book a lot. But it's that sort of those little details, little carvings, just birds and cats, and which actually can humanise a place and make it your relationship with it quite intimate. Just these little details that you notice.
Just moving through the pages, I don't know if there's anything here that comes from a particular moment or a particular observation.
Well, something that I must say is that painting a glass palace is incredibly difficult, and I hadn't thought it through. You'd think by this stage in my career I'd have a bit more of a clue to start drawing a glass palace, and then think, how do I do this? How do you draw something that you can't actually see? It's transparent. So that was one of the biggest challenges. And in fact, I spent quite a lot of time in those beautiful glass galleries at the V&A. Diane Hofmeyr and I would have meetings there and just look at the glass, this sort of 16th century glass, Venetian glass, which is just jaw-droppingly lovely. And I did lots of drawing there, and I took those ideas to try and influence the shape of the palace, and then just work out how to portray something that you can see through,
Tell us how you solved that problem, because we have to see it.
Yeah. Well, as with all my paintings, I drew first, and I blocked in the sky, so the things that you could see through the windows and through the arches of the palace. I used a lot of white gel pen to sort of, lift the sparkle and the, where light hits the glass. And I also used that device of things looking wobbly behind glass to try and show what was glass and what wasn't. There's a ladder here, which obviously one would expect to be straight, but it's wobbly. So when you actually look at the picture, you'll be able to, you can tell somehow that that's something that's behind glass, that it's therefore inside the palace. So it's little sort of tricks like that, really. Yeah.
Tell us something about the materials that you use. You're a painter, but you've talked about white gel pen that you put on the top here. So what are your favoured materials?
I throw all sorts of things at it. It's basically a pencil drawing with watercolour wash, and I use sort of transparent watercolours, which are in little bottles, which gives a wonderfully intense colour, and you can mix them. But then I'll also use watercolour pencils, which can be blended and give you a subtlety and give, put sort of depth into the image. I use collage a lot. I love a bit of collage. So that first page, the sort of vision of Venice, I've used quite a lot of collage. It might be things torn out of magazines, it might be a bit of old wrapping paper, it can be all sorts of things. It might be newspaper. Sometimes I've used newspaper, but it just gives, I find it difficult to describe it. I know it when I see it, but it just gives it a different sort of dimension somehow.
I think when you look at a book that you've illustrated, it's always recognisably Jane Ray. I haven't done this where I've looked at them, say, over time to see whether things actually do shift and change. But from your point of view, what sorts of things have developed in your illustration from when you first started?
Well, yes, I'm very clear in my own mind that it has developed a lot. And when I look at the first books I did, I'm sometimes quite shocked at what I did. I suppose it was my first books, I think, reflected the fact that I studied ceramics, and a lot of my degree show was drawing on clay, so a sort of incised line on flat clay surfaces. And I was very interested in Egyptian art and those sort of sideways profile figures.
That makes sense.
Yeah, yes. And it sort of developed from there, and a lot of my early books are very like that. So I think I've sort of loosened up as I've become more experienced and developed a more, I think it's a bit more fluid, got a bit more life in it. So I mean, I can still I can see the links, but I do feel that it's changed quite a lot. Yeah,
that's interesting. Maybe some of those earlier books were more decorative, and I think maybe the narrative is a stronger element in the more recent books.
Yeah. Yes. I think so. Yes.
So if we were to have a look on your desk in your studio or wherever it is you choose to paint, what sort of colours? Because again, the palette seems to be very recognisably you. I know they're different on different pages, but there's a kind of tonal range that seems to be something that you enjoy working with.
I think there are groups of colours that I love, and which are seen very clearly in a book about Venice, because it's all those terracottas and greys and creams for buildings, and then the sort of aquamarines and turquoises for water, and I love blue, so the blue sky, and I've always loved that combination of blue and gold, so blue with golden stars is just, it's very Venetian, and I love it.
I think, again, thinking about themes that run through your books, and is evident here in The Glassmaker's Daughter, you are obviously aware of the current interest that hasn't gone away, but is there again about reflecting realities in children's books? Inclusivity has always been part of your work, I think, and here when you get crowds of people together, it's as inclusive as it could be. How important is that to you?
I think it's absolutely vital. I suppose I was born and brought up in London. I've always lived and worked in London. My children all went to school at local primary schools. I go into schools a lot. And, I mean, the bottom line is I think I would just be embarrassed if I was presenting work to children and they couldn't see themselves in it. If I was saying this is a book for you, but actually they couldn't identify with it in any way. So it's always been something that I just think is really important, and I enjoy. I enjoy painting different kinds of people, different kinds of faces, different colours of skin, different ways of dressing. It just makes things a lot more exciting. It's one of the reasons I love living in London, I suppose.
I think your work is so exquisite and meticulous and detailed and wonderful. It would terrify me if I were working on one of these and then I made a mistake. And I just wonder, what happens? Because you're not working digitally here. What happens? Do you make mistakes?
Oh yes, I do. I think I'm probably about the last illustrator in the world who's not working digitally. I think we're a diminishing number. Yes, mistakes. Of course, mistakes happen. Surprisingly, 9 times out of 10 you can rescue it. I mean, I do find I can rescue it. I'm very loath to put something to one side and abandon it. I think probably the most dramatic mistake I made was on a book called Can You Catch a Mermaid, which I did 20 years ago, long time ago. And I was literally just finishing, just going through it the last time before I delivered the artwork. And I knocked over my painting water all over the whole pile of artwork.
Oh, my goodness.
And there was this sort of moment of complete panic, and what do I do? I've ruined everything. And in fact, it was just the top image, which was the cover. And because it was a story about water, it didn't matter. It really didn't matter. And I sort of dabbed it and dried it, and it was fine. I just thought, actually, sometimes these things can lead you down another path, and you can get too precious about it. Sometimes accidents can open a new possibility.
Was there anything when you were working on this book that proved to be, apart from the glass that we've already talked about was a particular challenge, but were there any things that You got partway through and you really wanted to change?
I can't think of anything other than the glass, and that really was a major challenge to work out how to make this look convincing, and also how to maintain that technique for a whole double page spread, you know. So I mean they took a very, very long time to get right. And one of the lovely things was that in production the publishers added some sparkle to there's a page where the glass palace shatters and falls tinkling to the ground, so there are lots of shards of silver and sort of rainbow foil stuff, and it, you know, I was really pleased with it.
This page is quite a key moment, isn't it, where the glass is broken to smithereens and you almost have to turn the page and have something that is quite momentous there. When illustrating a children's book, it's not just about one illustration followed by another illustration. There's a pace within it as well, isn't there? How does that sort of planning of the story take place for you?
Well, I find it's quite useful to think in almost filmic terms, that you're sort of panning out and panning in as you would be behind a camera, because I mean you don't want everything to be at the same pitch all the time. So you want to have drama, you want to have quieter moments, you want to have little moments where you dwell on a detail. So that always suggests to me, you know, you'll sort of pan in on a face or an expression or something that somebody's holding, and then pan out to a sort of more dramatic panorama, or, you know, sort of a more dramatic scene. And this of the glass palace falling down is that scene in this book. And yeah, it just adds pace and drama and makes you want to turn the page and see what happens next. You know, if something's all at one pitch, it gets dull, I think. Yeah.
I mean, another page that, well, I appreciated it all, of course, but I was really struck by these two images in the mirror, and how it's not just expression, which is focusing our emotions on those pictures, but also how you've actually painted and the colour and everything that you've used there.
Well, yes, I mean, I love having all these little visual clues and things that will draw you in. And the books that I always enjoyed as a child were ones where it didn't matter how many times you revisited a page, you'd see something else, you'd see something new that you felt only you had spotted, you know. So in this page, where the girl she's transformed from her miserable self to her happy self, and I've kind of reflected that in her clothes as well. So the hat she's wearing, which we can see the back of, when she's miserable, it has a sort of cloud on it, and when she's happy, the cloud is moving out of the way and revealing the sunshine. And I love those little clues, and that's a sort of ancient tradition, isn't it? You'll see that in Renaissance paintings. Absolutely. And just other little visual stories going on, quite incidental to the main story. Yeah.
Is your artwork this size? Because I've seen some of your paintings which are absolutely tiny. So is this tiny or is it this size?
I mainly work same size. I've experimented sometimes and worked bigger, and it just didn't feel quite comfortable. And I think the pictures you're referring to were they little black and whites? Yeah, they were little scraper boards, and some of them were the same, postage stamp size. And scraper board is a technique where you're actually scratching into a layer of black ink and revealing a white underlay. And yes, I was doing that through a magnifying glass, and I don't think my eyesight's quite recovered. But yeah, I do like to do things same size. It just feels, and it works with the book. There aren't any surprises then. You know how it's going to read and how it's going to feel when you hold the book in your hands.
Obviously, you work with a designer as well who helps to lay the text out. How do you know what space to leave for the text? Is that all planned out in advance?
Yes, pretty much, because I need to know how much space I've got to fill, and I've sometimes driven designers mad by forgetting and sort of extending my illustration into their space. No, it's really important to sort of know the size of the typeface and to know how much space it's going to take up. You don't want to crowd the text, I think designers are the sort of unsung part of the the team in making picture books. There's the author and the illustrator, and the designer is hugely important.
The text is as much a part of the visual, your visual response to the book, isn't it? When you look at it as a whole, not just as text and image, but you look at the whole page together. And even things like choosing the right font for that story, so important.
Yes, absolutely.
You brought some sketchbooks with you. I wonder if we could have a look.
Certainly. So my sketchbooks are a funny combination of scrapbook, notebook, sketchbook. So in the beginning of my notes for The Glassmaker's Daughter, I've got some things cut out of magazines and brochures and things.
This is amazing. So we're looking at a picture of a head, on top of which is some headpiece that looks like a tree.
Made out of coral or a tree, or it's absolutely glorious. And the hair, the girl's hair, is sort of like a cloud, isn't it? It's just beautiful.
I have to say, this is one of the tidiest sketchbooks I've ever seen. The handwriting's beautiful, and yes, the notes are very tidy, Jane.
I suppose I like to start each book knowing the size of the page I'm working with, and knowing the deadline, and just having all that information gathered in one place, so that I don't forget. And with this book, I've put the date that it was set as well, so sort of 1520, that sort of time, just so that I can keep referring to costumes, and I can keep that in my head.
And what did you mean here when you were thinking about reflections and symmetry?
Well, I thought that since this was a story about glass and about mirrors, that may turn out to be an essential part of the story. I think in the end I didn't use it that much. But it was just a key idea that had come into my head. So I was just thinking about the double page spread in a picture book gives you immediately a symmetry. So I was just playing with that idea, which I used in one or two places. But
Tipu's tiger, I know that exhibit so much. It's with the man underneath and the tiger. I was fascinated with that as a child, but it scared me.
It is scary, very scary. But I quite like scary things. It's good.
So why does Tipu's tiger appear in a book about Venice?
There's a page where, because all these different people are bringing things to make her laugh, and so there's a mask maker, isn't there? And somebody turns up with a trapeze and a tightrope, and then there's a boat.
It's full of,
which is just full of all the people. And I suppose I was just thinking of Tipu's tiger as being, it was a gift that was made to amuse some king somewhere, I think, and just these sort of ridiculous things that have been bought to entertain her, the glove maker and the sausage stringer and the baker. So at this stage I was just jotting down completely random thoughts. And if we turn over, here was some just trying to think about how I might represent glass. So there's some chandeliers, which again probably came from the V&A. And then I started experimenting with tracing paper and gel pen, white gel pen and silver on a grey background. So this was very, very early on. I wasn't even sure how I was going, I wasn't even sure I was going to paint this book. It might all be collage. It might, just toying with ideas.
You've got some quotations from poetry in here as well.
Yes, Emily Dickinson, yeah. I don't think it applied to this book particularly. I think I just thought it was beautiful. At one stage we wanted one of the characters to be of limited stature, and in fact we couldn't make it work, sadly, because it's something that I would have liked to have done. But so I was just experimenting here, drawing people.
Couldn't make it work because it was difficult to do that representation sensitively, or because it didn't work for the story?
I think I wasn't a good enough artist. I couldn't do it sensitively enough. I was afraid that it would look awkward, that people wouldn't understand what we were doing, that the story would become about this, the person of restricted growth, rather than the story itself. And it's something that Diane and I talked about a lot, and it's an ongoing, it's an ongoing issue. How do you represent people with different abilities, disabilities? I try really hard to be inclusive, but I couldn't make this work. So here are some drawings for Daniela. And here is a photograph of a glass dress, and I just thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if the glassmaker's daughter wears a glass dress? But again, couldn't quite make it work.
No, we don't want a see-through dress.
No,
do we?
exactly, absolutely.
This is beautiful.
Yeah, so this is just a black and white photograph of water drops on grass. So I was just trying to work out still this ongoing, how on earth do I make this work? I tried drawing the glass palace with white gel pen on a grey background, which is quite nice, but it wasn't going to work with the way I was doing the rest of the book. Here are some images that from an earlier sketchbook that I'd done in Venice. I just wanted to remind myself of some window shapes. Again, these shapes that we were talking about earlier, the architectural framing devices, which can be so useful. Just little scraps and pieces.
Is this all pencil?
Yeah, that's pencil, and then the white gel pen again.
Right.
And then I found this grey tissue paper that was wrapped around some shoes, and I just tried drawing on that. Yeah.
Gosh, that's such a fascinating insight. I wonder whether we could just move on to your next project and talk a little bit, just to give people a flavour of what they've got to look forward to. So Corey's Rock is a book that you've illustrated for Sita Brahmachari.
Yes.
And very different, so we're in a completely different time frame, back into the modern day here.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about this book. And
this is a beautiful sort of poetic novella by Sita Brahmachari, set in Orkney. It's about a family with a Nigerian father, Scottish mother, and their daughter Isla, and they have recently lost a little boy who has died, and they've come to Orkney to sort of try and rebuild their lives, to try and recover, with their dog as well, who's a huge part of the family. Obviously it's a very sad scenario, and Sita just writes so lyrically, so beautifully. It was a real pleasure to illustrate this book, and it's about so many things. It's about dreaming. It's about the refugee experience. It's about looking out to sea, and it's about returning to the sea. So Isla keeps seeing her little brother in the seals that surround the island, that swim around the Orkneys, and her father is an archaeologist, so he is sort of involved in the archaeological projects on the Orkneys. There's just layer upon layer of meaning. I find it very difficult to... Sita would talk about it far more adequately than I can. I do the pictures.
what I'm interested in, as you said, it's a very sad scenario, but the pictures actually are very comforting. So when we look at the jacket illustration here, you're not going to read a book that is entirely gloomy, because it's very uplifting in the colour that you've used. So in a way you're sort of helping the reader through the illustration to cope with some of that.
Well, I hope so. We certainly didn't want it to be a tragic book or a depressing book. We wanted it to be about life and about memory and about loss. I mean, obviously, when you're surrounded by the natural beauty of a place like the Orkneys, the sky and the sea and the sunrise and the sunset and these beautiful animals and birds, there is huge comfort in nature. There is huge reassurance and the sort of feeling that this was all here before we were and will be after we've gone, which I always find incredibly comforting. But it's such a lyrical story about dreams and letting go and discovery and just so many things.
Fabulous. Well, that's one for us to talk about on another occasion in more depth, and I'm just so appreciative of you coming to meet with me and talk about Glassmaker's Daughter today, Jane. It's been an absolute pleasure and delight, and I've learnt so much as well, so thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I've loved every minute of it. Thank you.